home for our children, but asylum seekers can go anywhere. Criticism on Utrecht for reserving all social housing for asylum seekers for weeks. And municipalities are lagging far behind in housing refugees. What you've just listened to are some of the recent newspapers headlines about refugees and housing. Often migrants are blamed for a lot of the issues and problems in our society, and one of them is the housing crisis. In this special episode of City Rights Radio, we invite our guests Hidaya and Melissa to talk about the reality behind refugees and housing. Hidaya is an activist, a feminist with a heart of gold, and co-founder of Amsterdam City Rights, an alliance to support undocumented people. Having been undocumented for a long time, she had to struggle to find a roof. Melissa, co-founder of the WoonProtest, fights for the rights to housing for all, especially in Amsterdam. And I am Joygail, and I will be your host for today. This podcast is a collaboration with One World and Here to Support, an organization dedicated to making undocumented refugees visible, audible, and resilient. And together, we're making a 3-episode podcast series on the problems migrants face and the political aspects of it as we approach the Dutch elections, scheduled for November 22nd. After discussing work rights in the last episode, we will shed light on the housing crisis in the Netherlands. We'll also take a look how the organizers of the WoonProtest look at how migrants are used as scapegoats and what the reality of their experience can tell us. I want to start off with you, Hidaya. Could you please introduce yourself to the listeners?
Thank you very much, Joy. My name is Hidaya and Melissa, originally from Uganda, and an undocumented person for the last 6 years. I'm the co-founder of Amsterdam City Rights, which was basically formed to fight for the rights of people whose asylum procedure hasn't gone good, people who are stateless, and people who are still looking for a place of belonging.
So, Hidaya, there are many misconceptions in the media and politics about refugees. People think they get like a luxurious hotel room, free food, money, but your experience tells another story, right? How was it like for you to come to the Netherlands, and what was your first experience with housing?
When I arrived in the Netherlands, I really thought I'm going to find everything so smooth, but on the contrary, it was very different. I was moving from one location to another after I was granted a negative. And from there, I was able to move into a shelter. And even in the shelters where I moved, I could not really stay in one location. I still had to do a continuous move from one location to another. The situation in the shelters is not really the best because you are forced to sleep with 6 people and you do not even have adequate space, and there's a lot of no privacy.
Okay. So tell me about this location. What were the conditions like? You already said like it was narrow. You also had to share space with other people, but like, what was your space like?
In the locations, to be precise, the shelters, the situation has not really improved from the previous years to today. When we speak about conditions, we talk about sleeping good. You cannot sleep in a very small confinement with many people and expect to sleep amicably. When it comes to the space of having your own dependency, you always feel that you cannot do certain things because at any one time you're never alone in the room. When we talk about the food that was really served in the shelters and in the agencies as well is not really the best. This food has been pre-cooked a couple of days ago. That means you do not really have fresh food to eat. You do not really decide if you can eat this food or not because that is what is served to you.
So there are these conceptions, but like if I hear you, they're not right. Where do you think these conceptions come from then?
The misconceptions come from the people who have lack of expertise of what really happens in the shelters and in the agencies. Some people live in the former hotels, which happens to be current agency, but because someone knows this was a former hotel, the life and the living conditions are luxurious. This is very different. I think people really need to dive in to find out the real information about people living in those particular places, not just looking at a location that was formerly a hotel, and then you think the people who are living there are living in a very luxurious way. It's very different because in these particular places, the same things that really happens in the shelters, like you don't have any dependency, like I said before, you do not have a sense of belonging. You cannot decide whether you will eat this food, because if you don't eat this food, that means you're going to starve. The living money that is given in some places is as less than 20 euros. You don't expect someone to live on 20 euros and you consider it living luxurious.
20 euros per what? Per week?
Per week.
Per week. Okay.
Yes.
And how many times did you have to move, actually?
I'll talk about my personal experience. As before I moved out of the AZC, I had moved to 4 cities. I had moved to Eindhoven, Dronten, Zwolle, and Kampen. And then when I moved to Amsterdam, I also had to move. I moved to Amsterdam South, I moved to Amsterdam East, I moved to the West, and then now I'm back in Southeast. So the moving, to me, created a lot of stress and depression, because you are not really certain how long you have to live in a particular place before you get moved. Even up to today, I'm not really sure if I'm in this place for a longer time. I'm still on the move. So the moving does not stop, not until you acquire your status.
I can imagine that the moving makes it hard for you to actually settle, to have social connections, to do purposeful things. How is that for you?
When I did my research as to why we are being moved from one location to another, the Netherlands has made it in a way that you do not connect with the people for a longer time. As you try to dive in with your community or the network that's around you, that means they are also finding a way of moving you to another location. To me, it brought a lot of challenge in a way that I would have learned my basic Dutch or the Dutch skills, but even up to today, I am not able to speak the Dutch, because as you try to understand a given community, you are moved to another location. In Amsterdam, the Dutch language in Amsterdam and how people welcome you in Amsterdam is very different from the people in the rural areas or the people in other cities. So this creates a lot of lack of integration. I would say I haven't really integrated well with the Dutch community because of these movements. And at some point I feel very depressed, because I would be able to connect to a particular community of people for a longer time, establish what I can be useful to them on, or establish how they can be useful to me.
If we're talking about housing and shelter, these sounds like not fortunate situations to be in and to move around. So in the Netherlands, we have a housing crisis, and I'm looking to you now, Melissa. You're a housing activist and co-initiator of WoonProtest. The housing crisis affects every one of us. If I'm correct, you moved a lot as well, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
How much did you move?
In Amsterdam, about 28 times.
28 times. That's quite.
But I mean, I've lived here since a while, right?
Yeah.
So, but since I was 18, basically.
Okay. You moved around a lot. What are the reasons that you moved around a lot?
Well, in the beginning, I was just one of these people that didn't really know that at the when you're 18, you're supposed to kind of subscribe yourself to this social housing list, so that you can, and then you kind of come on a waiting list. So I did that quite late, and then the kind of the income that you're allowed to have kind of went down. So I have my income is small enough to be able to get into social housing, but I just still have to wait for another, I don't know how many years, because
You have about 13 years of waiting list for public or social housing in Amsterdam.
so if you do not do it through kind of the formal way, also because, for instance, you have parents that know that you're supposed to do that, and they help you, kind of remind you to do that. Then you kind of, then you have to fix it on the kind of private housing market, which is unregulated, which means that landlords can ask whatever they want, which means that most of the houses that you're able to rent are just very expensive. There were like a couple periods in my life where I had a little bit more money, and I just didn't want to spend like half or 3/4 of my salary just for something very basic as having a roof above your head. So I always kind of, in a way, I became kind of like a housing hustler, and I just kind of moved around as a nomad and used my kind of social capital and my network to find houses here and there where I could basically live for 1 or 2 years, and then I would have to move around again. And so, but I never really talk about my own situation, because it's kind of an example of that, that housing is a thing that a lot of people have to find all kinds of weird ways to be able to get there. But I've never been, actually homeless. I've never had to sleep on a street. I've never had to go to a shelter where I had to, kind of share my space with all these other people that I didn't know. I did like some informal student housing where I basically just kind of squatted a house here and there, like a room here and there. And then, like the university folks weren't allowed to find out that I was there, things like that. But I wouldn't consider myself to be, the main voice for people without homes, because I did manage to find houses here and there.
Of course.
And I'm, within the housing movement, we're of course looking at the kind of structural system change that is really needed to have a completely different housing system in the Netherlands, which means, housing is really meant for people to live in, and it's not meant as something that can be commodified, something that you can use for profit. Which is exactly what happened when we deregulated the entire market, and we marginalized the public housing in a huge way, right? So, and as long as, there are just not enough houses that have kind of normal rent, that are just affordable, you will always have people competing for these houses, which I think is really also dangerous and a toxic housing policy to have so many people within the population of your land to compete for something as basic as shelter.
Well, that basically refers to the next point that I wanted to make, because if you're looking at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 25 says everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of him or herself and their family. It looks like policy has been a lot about who lives where and not about the fact that housing is just a human right. Do you feel the same?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess the housing protests were very much centered around the message that housing is a human right, and that it should also, that any housing policy that is created should have that as a kind of starting point. Like, it means a lot to have adequate housing, means that you cannot discriminate, means that you have the right to have like a good living environment, that it can be close to your work, if you have work, or other kind of important social places. It means that it should be safe. It means that it should be healthy. So, we have hundreds and thousands of buildings in Netherlands that have mold in them. Which is a direct threat to our health. Housing has always been a problem. It's never been really treated as a human right. Also, what we consider to be human right, or the fact that human rights are important, is also becoming political debate instead of just a fact.
Yeah, just a given. Yeah.
So what kind of changed is that the white middle class is now also affected by the housing crisis. And now kind of, a lot of politicians, and also because of the housing protests, and more people kind of waking up like, this system is not really working for us. And in a way that is quite cynical also, right? Because the system never worked for undocumented people, for people with a lower income, for all kinds of marginalized groups, for basically the working class. Housing has always been an issue. But now we went so far in having this kind of psychotic housing system that creates wealth and doesn't create affordable housing, creates wealth for the wealthy. That now it's becoming more kind of, more mainstream, let's say, that there is indeed a problem. And we used to kind of ignore that problem. That's also what I would see as a kind of a task for whoever is working on housing, is to make sure that now that the middle class is also having an issue with housing, that we make sure that there will not only be middle class solutions for the middle class, but and often that means more houses for the middle class, less houses for those kind of below them. And that's kind of the process that we see of gentrification, right? Is more and more neighborhoods where people that were already living there are now kind of have to leave because there are more and more buildings that are being built for other people that have just a little bit more money than they had. If housing is a human right, then it has to be for everyone. And it doesn't matter if you have the right documents or not, or where you're from. And I guess that's not the reality now.
I pointed out some headliners before this intro, and the tendency in those headliners, like some people may say that refugees and migrants, come to the Netherlands, steal our houses, steal our wealth, which is a mindset that is very polarizing and also maybe reflects from the real issues and the real problems and cause of housing in Amsterdam. Do you have the feeling that mindset is definitely here in the Netherlands? And also, can we talk maybe about like what these real problems and maybe solutions for these things are, instead of just having the conversation as polarizing as it is right now? Do you often come across that mindset? Do you have that experience?
There was a time actually I was attending a session at Pakhuis Stryker, and I was talking about Uganda and how some of the things that we really face. And then when I talked about Uganda, someone from the audience said, Uganda only has a dictatorship. There's really nothing wrong. You're here to take our money. You're here to take our houses. So sometimes people have really used this situation on refugees and migrants as a whole. But as I've interacted with a few people who have lived in Amsterdam or in Netherlands for quite a long time, the housing process has not started with migration. It hasn't started with refugees, because we've had migration for the past 5,000 years. This problem has been there even before us coming here. So being used against us as refugees, it makes us feel very bad. They have not really looked at how to solve the problem, but they are looking for a particular group of people to blame.
And if we're talking about how to solve this problem, are there solutions, and what are the real solutions?
Well, what Hidaya just said is very true, that for the political game right now, it's not about solutions, really a blaming game. In the last couple of years, where I've been talking to a lot of different people that are about solutions, most of the times the conversation starts with, well, affordable housing for all, that's a good thing to want, but actually it's just very complicated, right? I mean, it's basically not doable, right? And it's Actually, it's very doable. Also, we used to have much more affordable housing, right? We lost about 100,000 affordable housing in the last couple of years. The amount of affordable housing that's been built has been halved since 2013. When you look at just the numbers of migration and then the numbers of also people that are leaving the Netherlands, and also the fact that we have more and more people kind of becoming too old, like the vergrijzing, actually I would say it would be more logical to say that migrants are not only welcome, but also needed, and that they're definitely not part of the problem. They're part of the solution. And what is the solution? Well, first of all, it would be good is if we stop blaming people that are actually victims of the housing crisis and framing them as the people that created it. And then policy-wise, it's really a question of priorities, right? So the government now said that they will build about 900,000 houses between now and 2030. We don't really need 900,000 houses. We need about half of that to be affordable. And then nobody's homeless anymore in the Netherlands. Also, we have about 2.3 million empty square meters. Only in Amsterdam, we have more than 10,000 empty buildings that have been empty for more than 2 years. So this is a scarcity frame. So like the frame that there are no houses is just untrue. There are a lot of houses, they're just empty and they're not being used. Why? Because it's more profitable to speculate, to wait for certain conditions on the housing market and sell them, or do something else which is not providing affordable and adequate housing for all. This is very much a political choice. You could very easily say, we're going to use these houses, we're going to all the houses that have been sold, we're going to take them back in public hands, and we're going to provide enough affordable housing for everybody that needs it. And then you don't have a scarcity problem.
So we spoke very much about political choices. If there are things for the people, for the general public to take away from this podcast and from this problem, what would that be for you, Hidaya?
What I would like the society, Netherlanders and Amsterdam, is to know that migration today, migration tomorrow, migration forever. Because apparently what we see that happened in Palestine and Israel, that means you're pushing more people from their homeland to here. You have to solve the problems of refugees. The more the problems don't get solved, the more people we see. And it's not about refugees who have taken away the housing situation in Netherlands. It's about politics for people who have failed to put working policies that everybody gets a home, because human rights is a basic right, and even refugees deserve the right to a decent home.
That's a beautiful takeaway. And for you, Melissa, also, are there things people could do in accordance with the WoonProtest, for example?
Yes, well, I would just like to second what Hidaya just said, and maybe just add that also, Europeans have been migrating to the rest of the world for thousands and hundreds of years, often armed as imperialists, and whenever that kind of switches around, then all of a sudden becomes a huge problem, which of course is kind of a weird way to think about movement in the world. So what I hope that people take away from this is, again, it's not migration, it's not the problem, it's not why you cannot find a house. It's really the political decisions that have been made. And you can organize against that in all kinds of ways. You can organize in your own apartment with your neighbors. You can organize with your community, in your neighborhood, in your street. You can organize on a city level. You can organize on a national level. Because the thing is that if there is no protest, if there is no resistance, if people do not organize, from below, then it's probably only going to get worse. So we really need to step in and build this kind of solidarity among different groups of people that have been, that are now part of the housing crisis and feel like they are powerless. I hope the most important message perhaps is you are probably quite powerless as an individual, but you are very powerful within a collective. So, let's organize together and keep in touch with both of us.
Well, thank you, Melissa, for your inspiring and interesting views. And thank you, Hidaya, for sharing your experience. Now I understand that the housing crisis and the shelter issues that refugees face are very connected. And to conclude, we have learned that we need more and better shelters for refugees and undocumented people, and housing needs to be a right for all. And we have learned that refugees are not the problem for housing, but that the problem is rather the commercialization, or the over-commercialization, I should say, of spaces, and the political choices that are being made. To get more information on this topic, One World released an article written by journalist Roxanne Sudagar. Please go check that out on their website. And like I said, thank you, Hidaya, and thank you, Melissa, and thank you, listeners, and until the next episode.